Alright, what's up? For LuxuryWafers.com, I'm Jim. I'm here with Townes Earl. What's up, Justin?
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Your tour schedule is ridiculous.
It stays pretty ridiculous.
It's very long. When I do this, I'm referring to your MySpace page. Here's a music player, and then there's a picture of you. Usually there's like a hot chick with you because you have two really attractive women that are in photos.
Mm-hmm.
What's the title? I mean, Midnight at the Movies.
What's it all about? I made this record to kind of to paint an imagery of when I was 18 years old. I was obsessed with kind of a mid-40s Times Square kind of, imagery. Like I read a lot of Jack Kerouac, and I read all that beat literature, and I think that it was just me finally processing all of that out. Well, it's one of those things that I always kind of learned. I always did on the go. I haven't had a stable home most of my life. And so everything was always done on the move, and I learned to do everything on the move, and so I've never been a sit-down kind of writer. I write on like little scraps of paper and like leave messages on my voicemail. I never really write much down either. It's all spontaneous. I don't write set lists. I do them in random orders every night, but the the lead-ins to songs are pretty set. But they have a theme, and so he knows what I'm getting ready to do when I start telling the story or putting the tail on it. It's just a more interesting way to do the show. Not all crowds are the same. I was brought up on the notion that if you can't do it solo acoustic, then you don't need to be doing it at all. There's always two different versions of my songs. There's what I can do solo, and then there's what I can do with Cory. And what I can do with Cory is always bigger. It's always bigger and better than what I can do solo. We met about 10 years ago, and a friend of ours had to go to work, but he gave us the keys to his apartment and a bottle of liquor and a case of beer, and told us to said y'all need to meet. Put us in his apartment, and when he came home, we drank all the liquor, got into his bag of weed, drank all the. And we were well into the beer, and we were about 3/4 of the way through the Harry Smith anthology. And we started singing together that night, and it was one of those things that just kind of worked together right from the start, and I can hold my own on my own, but I think we're best. Our best points are when we're together. I got my two. I've played the Ryman Auditorium 3 times. So that was a big one, and I got my first Ryman Auditorium when I was about 16 years old. But last year I got to play the Grand Ole Opry. When they left the Ryman Auditorium, they cut the center stage, like where the center stage microphone. They cut that circle out of the stage, and they took it and they put it in the new Opry stage. So when you walk into that center mic position, that circle that's where Hank Williams' boots, like the scars on the floor, are knocked by Hank Williams' boots, and Porter Wagner's boots, and Uncle Dave Macon's boots. He did his crazy, sit in the rock. He used to sit in a rocking chair. And he'd tip back, like he'd be leaning forward singing, and then he'd tip back in the rocking chair and he'd start patting his feet.
What is it?
Uncle Dave Macon. He's from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, one of the best banjo players that ever lived. He was actually the first big star of the Grand Ole Opry. He was the very first bona fide national star of the Grand Ole Opry, and he had a banjo with diamonds studded all over it, all up and down the headstock. Put a picture of Webb Pierce in 1950. Right next to a picture of Bootsy Collins in 1980, and you got the same, fashion idea. They think the same way. That's where a lot of that comes. I mean, a lot of this music comes from is, back if you listen to Bill Monroe, early Bill Monroe, he'll have these weird rhythms like this, like hitting these strange, these really just bizarre rhythms, and that's not that stuff, all that early bluegrass and all the early country music. You listen to early Hank Williams and tell me that that's country music. That's fucking blues. Hank Williams was hanging out in the juke joints around the black musicians, and that's always been the case with that kind of music. It's it's all been the best forms of it were the earliest forms of it when it was closest to its roots.
All right, man. Well, thank you very, very much for doing this.
Thank you.
And, Townes Earl, Midnight at the Movies.
All right.